IPOs are few and far between in Russia, and even when a company does declare its intent to go to the market, it often bails out at the last minute. To get some insight into the problems and pitfalls of going public, our business editor Nick Paul spoke to Mike Smith from auditors BDO. He started by asking him why Russian firms still prefer London over Moscow.
I think London has been an attractive option for a lot of companies in Russia, bigger companies in particular. To some extent now there's a track record of successful listings and of the share prices increasing over a period of time. I think there are a lot of investors that are willing to buy shares based in London. The volume of trades is much higher in London than it is in Russia. There is the opportunity to transfer control away from Russia, as I mentioned. And I think even in the Russian domestic markets, the organisations such as pension funds tend to invest outside of Russia, so I think the market within Russia is much more limited.
Do you see that changing? I mean, Russia sort of rising up the rankings somehow, Moscow at least?
The articles that I've read recently suggest that things are likely to continue with a lot of listings overseas, as opposed to within Russia.
We've seen a number of failures of IPOs, particularly companies getting right up to the point where they're supposed to list and suddenly withdrawing. What's gone wrong in those particularly? I mean, why the lack of foresight?
Well, it might not be a lack of foresight, to be fair, because in some cases, I've worked on a number of IPOs or potential IPOs where they haven't completed. It can be for any number of reasons. It can be because the market conditions change. It can be for strategic reasons. So, for example, I was working with a company in South Africa for quite a period of time, and part of the way through the IPO process, they decided to acquire another business that was entirely different, so then they had to integrate that. So there can be reasons such as those. But sometimes I think companies almost have this desire to list no matter what, and they think they're going to be there to fulfill the requirements, and at a very late stage they suddenly understand, or maybe the sponsors tell them that they're just not ready.
An expensive process for the company that doesn't make it, or even the ones that do?
It can be very expensive, yes. In one case, I worked on the fees were equivalent of the total amount of money raised on IPO. So, and this was many, many millions of dollars. So it's an expensive process, but one that hopefully is worthwhile. And if companies seek the right advice at the right time, then hopefully they can avoid the position of spending too much money only to find that they're not going to list in the last place.
Can you spot the companies which are going to either have a tough time having an IPO here, or once they've listed may not fare as well as they'd hoped?
One of the interesting things about Russia is that a lot of the companies that trade here don't have the background of strong governance, strong control that you might see in the West. So we see quite a few owner-managed businesses where the owner is very much hands-on. Sometimes they don't seem to fully understand the implications of flotation and loss of control. And those companies quite often have a lot to do to meet the requirements of a listing. They need to put in a strong management team, perhaps independent directors, to establish good governance procedures, to really have the management information needed to run the business. So it's fairly easy to spot the ones that have a lot to do to meet the requirements of flotation.